Alright, let's get started. Welcome to the 7th video in this series on orchestration. In our last video, we discussed the basic fundamentals of each instrument in the brass section. We covered how they produce their sounds, what ranges they work best in, and just some general tips for how to write for them. In this video, we're going to take a deeper look into the types of playing techniques that are likely to be found in a sound library, and that are available to you when orchestrating your music. It's not as lengthy as the list we had for the string section, but this kind of information can still be found in lots of places on the internet and in plenty of books. So once again, I'm really just going to treat this video more like a quick overview. We'll go more in depth with any techniques that I think are particularly awesome or that I think need a little extra explaining, but for the most part, we're going to be moving at a fairly quick pace this time around. So with that, let's get started. Once again, arguably the most common technique you'll come across will be sustained notes. This is the default method for playing a note and simply consists of playing any given note for its entire written length. Next up, we've got staccato, which is kind of like the opposite of sustained notes. Staccato notes are quick and short. They're notated with a small dot over or under a note and are typically translated as play a shortened version of this note and fill the remaining note value with silence. Brass instruments are particularly adept at performing this technique and can provide a lot of attack or punch to a staccato note. Next, we have marcato, which essentially is a strong accent on a particular note. By placing a marcato sign over any particular note, you're basically telling the performer to hit the note with a little extra oomph when they play it. Next, we have trills, which are notated just like the string section and result in performers moving very quickly between two pitches for a sustained amount of time. Flutter tongue is a similar technique, in which the performers roll their tongues like they're rolling an R sound. It creates a sound similar to a tremolo in the string section, and funnily enough, they're often notated the same way. You can also write flutter tongue over the passage if you want to be extra specific. Kuvre is a somewhat rarer technique that is mostly found written for horn players. It translates to brassy and instructs the player to perform with a little extra force, in a way that really brings out the brass qualities of the instrument. This is, as I mentioned, most commonly found with horn players, as a way to help them sound more idiomatically like brass instruments, rather than half brass, half woodwind. So now let's shift gears a little and go a bit more in depth on a handful of techniques. First up are tonguing and slurring. So just like how the default playing technique with strings is to separate each note by switching bowing direction with each note, the default playing technique for all brass instruments is to separate each note by lightly tapping their tongue against the inside of their lips. This momentarily stops the vibrations and is called tonguing. Players will automatically tongue each note to separate them when they're written. But when you place a slur over a series of notes, it tells the performer to not tongue any of them, and rather to perform each note unbroken and with a single breath. This creates a much smoother sound, as each note transitions into the next without a break. However, keep in mind that each slur is done with only one breath, so you shouldn't try to make them last too long. A good reference point is having a maximum of 3 measures when performing with a fairly quick tempo, and only 1 measure when performing with a slow tempo. Of course, this is just a starting point, and you'll be able to adjust appropriately as you gain more experience with your writing. Next up, let's tackle Consordino, or playing with a mute. One big advantage of using mutes in your music is that they help both the trumpet and trombone blend more fluidly with woodwind instruments, especially when both mutes and quiet dynamics are used together. Brass instruments have many different types of mutes, but the most common type is the straight mute. This is a simple cone-shaped mute that the trumpet and trombone players can insert into the bell of their instrument to create a narrower and more focused sound. When playing quiet dynamics with a straight mute, the instrument will sound more muffled and distant. But when performing louder dynamics with a straight mute, the instruments will sound more narrow and intense. Whenever you want to use a straight mute on your own music, all you have to do is write Consordino over the passage that is to be performed muted, and senza sordino over the music when the performers can take them off. Make sure to provide enough time for your performers to both apply and remove their mutes. Another type of mute that can be used with the trumpet and occasionally on the trombone is the cup mute. This looks like a straight mute with a collar on it. It's not found very commonly in orchestral music, but is a common mainstay in jazz. The cup mute cannot play as loudly as a straight mute can, but it helps create a muffled and nasal tone that can create a jazzy edge to your music. If you want to use a cup mute in your music, simply write with cup mute over your music, and without cup mute when you're done. Since cup mutes are typically uncommon, especially for the trombone, it's common courtesy to just let your players know when they will be needed ahead of time so that they can make any arrangements necessary to have one ready. Special mutes do exist for both the horn and tuba, but neither are used very frequently. Tuba mutes in particular are very rare and, in my opinion, a little unnecessary. They have a very subtle impact on the tone quality and honestly are so large that they're very inconvenient to carry around. Horn mutes are a little more useful, but it's more common for the players to perform their notes stopped, or simply with a hand inside the bell of their instrument. This creates a muffled and nasally sound and even brings the sounding pitch of each note down a half step. Now, you don't need to worry about this since most horn players will just take care of transposing the notes on their own. However, it is good information to know in case you ever want to use the shift in pitch and tone quality to your advantage in a sound design type situation. To notate when your horn players should stop a particular note, all you need to do is add a little cross over your stopped notes, and a little circle over non-stopped notes. A single circle is all that is needed to end a stopped passage. Moving on from mutes, let's discuss the final playing technique that we'll cover in this video, glissandi. Performing a glissando is when the instrument seamlessly slides from one note to the next while hitting each chromatic note in between. Within the brass section, the trombone is the only instrument that can perform a true glissando. By manipulating its slide, the trombone can move through multiple overtone series to gliss through every note performable with a steady amount of lip pressure. However, the trombone and every other brass instrument can also perform a partial gliss. This is where the performer works with a fixed length of tubing and manipulates their air pressure and lip vibration speed to quickly move through the multiple partials of a single overtone series. This is obviously more limited than a true glissando, and typically works best when you're in the higher registers, where there's less space between each partial, but it can nonetheless be very effective. Horns tend to be the best choice when working with this type of glissando, but any of the brass instruments can do it. To notate a glissando, all you have to do is write your starting note and your ending note, and connect the two with a wavy line. You should keep in mind that when you're working with a partial glissando, you want to make sure that the starting pitch and the ending pitch are performed with the same fingering position. If not, it doesn't mean that the glissando is impossible. A talented performer can pretty much gliss between any two notes that you write. However, it does mean that it will not be a functional glissando. And that means that it might not sound exactly how you imagined it would, and will almost definitely sound different every single time it's performed, since it will rely more heavily on the artistic choices of the player performing it. Finally, let's wrap up this video by discussing just a few notating conventions when writing for the brass. While not everyone is interested in writing their own sheet music, I still think it's important to cover these ideas, since they'll give a clearer idea of how these instruments are approached. Typically, each brass instrument has a single staff, with multiple parts written on it. If you have 3 trumpets, for example, you'll typically see 3 separate lines written on the staff, one for each player. If this convention is not followed, then there are some extra steps you need to take. If only one line is written, it will often be assumed that only the first player is to perform it. If you want more than one player to perform it, then you can write A2 or A3 over the staff, where the number refers to how many players you want to perform the line. If you have more than one line written, but still less lines than players, you can simply write 1.2. Where each number you write refers to which performer should be reading the lines. In this particular example, we have the first player and the second player. In these situations, the first player will take the highest line, while the next player up will play the next highest line. The one exception to all of this are the horns. While they still follow the same numbering conventions, the horn section typically has 2 staves, rather than the one shared staff. The first staff is for the first and second horns, while the second staff is for the third and fourth horns. These are used to keep the staves from getting too difficult to read, with 4 lines crammed into one staff. In this case, horns 1 and 3 typically play the highest lines, while horns 2 and 4 perform the lower lines. Note how this means that horn 3 typically performs higher notes than horn 2. Again, this is just for practical reasons, to keep everything as easy to read as possible. And with that, we've reached the end of another video. I hope you found it helpful, and if you'd like to be notified when the next one is published, please like and subscribe to the channel, and please share it with anyone who you think would also benefit from these videos. And thank you again for the incredible support and the very kind words that you've been sharing with me in the comment section. They really do mean a lot. So until next time, everybody just keep working hard, keep studying, and as always, keep creating new music.